Founders think perfect ideas win markets, but the reality is that raw volume beats perfection. For instance, generating 10 novel concepts daily for 6 months builds an unstoppable idea machine. This is a vital concept because most executive teams stall while waiting for one flawless strategy. In fact, my experience directing marketing for high-growth tech companies taught me that quantity always breeds quality. You can listen to my conversation with Tim about this system to learn more.
Tune in, listen up, it's marketing time. Bright ideas sparking, blowing your mind. From strategies to big exec dreams, catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Welcome to the Marketing Execution Podcast. This is the show for tech founders and leaders building B2B products and technologies. We show you how to go further, faster to get the business results you need.
From strategies to big exec dreams, catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Mark, I've been worried. My ability to generate creative solutions, well, it actually feels like it's atrophying. I used to be an idea factory. Now I feel like I'm in a rut. Is it because I'm older or is this burnout?
It is not age, and it is definitely not permanent burnout. Maybe your idea muscle just got flabby. Don't worry, it happens to the best of us.
That's a very specific word choice. Flabby? You sound like a personal trainer.
Because that is exactly what the brain is. It is a muscle. If you spend 6 months in a hospital bed, your legs would atrophy. You wouldn't be able to walk. The brain works the same way. If you stop forcing it to sweat, it forgets how to sprint.
Okay, so how do we get it back in the gym? Because having no ideas is basically a death sentence for a founder.
Totally. And this isn't my concept, by the way. This comes from James Altucher. He calls it the idea machine. It is a deceptively simple system. You have to write down 10 ideas every single day.
That sounds surprisingly easy. Only 10?
You'd think so, but try it. The first 3 ideas are easy. The next 2 are okay. But idea number 7 is brutally hard. That is where your brain starts to sweat, and that's where we beef up our neuroplasticity.
Okay, so it's not about the ideas being good. It's about the strain of finding them.
You have to give yourself permission to come up with terrible ideas. If you demand perfection, you'll freeze up. You need volume, novelty over feasibility.
Okay, I get the theory, but I don't even know where to start. What type of ideas should I come up with? Do I list 10 business ideas? That decision paralysis kills me.
That's the exact problem this new framework solves. It combines Altucher's old school discipline with ChatGPT. It basically outsources the role of the drill sergeant.
Okay, how does that work?
So we talked about this in the Marketing Execution Podcast recently. Well, we discussed similar themes there, but the specific prompt we're talking about is to create a persona for the AI. You tell ChatGPT to act as an insightful interrogator. You don't ask it for ideas. You ask it to question you.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Right. So in your new prompt, you feed the AI 3 defined categories. It could be health, wealth, and relationships. Then you tell it to pick a focus, either improving your life or improving another person's life.
Okay, so I set the constraints, then what?
Then the AI generates a specific probing question based on those variables. For example, it might ask, what are 10 risky things you could do this week to get out of your comfort zone? Or what are 10 ways you could improve your sleep quality starting tonight? It removes the friction of choosing the topic.
So it forces you into a box immediately.
Exactly. Constraints drive creativity. If I tell you, give me 10 ideas, you will blank out. If I tell you, give me 10 ways to surprise your wife for under $20, you can probably rattle those off. This AI prompt acts as that constraint engine.
Okay, I assume the goal here is to do this daily, like a workout.
Every single day. And you shouldn't judge the output while you're doing it. The prompt instructions even say focus more on novelty than feasibility. You have to turn off your internal editor. The internal editor is the enemy of the idea muscle.
That's hard for founders. We are trained to kill bad ideas immediately to save resources.
And that is why so many post-Series A founders stop innovating. They get too good at filtering. Look, if you write 10 ideas a day, that is more than 3,000 ideas a year. Even if 99% are garbage, doing the math, that leaves you with 30 brilliant, life-changing ideas per year.
Okay, that makes the ROI on this insane. 30 viable ideas is more than most people have in a lifetime.
It changes your life in 6 months. You walk into a meeting and you are just faster than everyone else because you've been doing push-ups with your brain every morning while they were doom scrolling.
I love that. So, practically speaking, I paste this prompt into ChatGPT. It asks me to choose a category. I say wealth, then what?
Then it might ask you to choose a focus. Let's say you pick improving my life. The AI then looks at those choices and hits you with a laser-focused question. Maybe it asks, what are 10 ways you could monetize your existing network without being annoying? That is a great question, actually, right? And now you have to answer. You list 10. The first 3 are obvious, as for referrals, whatever. But by number 9, you're writing things like host a private dinner for competitors. Suddenly, you're in new territory.
Okay, so it creates a feedback loop, using the AI not to think for you, but to force you to think. I guess it's a distinction most people miss.
Most people use AI to be lazy. This approach uses AI to make you work harder.
I am going to try this tomorrow morning. But this brings up a huge logistical question, though. Let's pivot and talk about how a founder should actually prioritize and execute on the good ideas without losing focus on the core business.
You know, that's actually the question that makes or breaks this whole thing. Because the practice itself takes maybe 15 minutes. That's it. 15 minutes to write 10 ideas.
Okay, but 15 minutes feels like a lot when you're already running on fumes.
I get that. I really do. But here's what I've realized working with founders over the years. We always have time for the things we believe will move the needle. The problem isn't time. The problem is that we don't see idea generation as a core business activity. We see it as extra, as a nice to have.
Oh, that's a good point. We treat it like it's separate from the real work.
Yes, but think about what ideas actually are for a startup. Ideas are your raw material. They're the thing you turn into products, into campaigns, into partnerships. Without a steady supply of ideas, you're running on whatever you came up with 6 months ago.
So you're saying this isn't a productivity hack, it's actually core infrastructure for the business.
Yes, that's exactly it. And when you frame it that way, suddenly finding 15 minutes becomes a lot easier. I know of a company where the founder started doing this practice on his commute, just voice memos into his phone. 10 ideas before he even got to the office. Because the format doesn't matter. Write it in a notebook or record yourself on the phone. What matters is the consistency and the specificity of the question you're asking yourself. And it's a great exercise for founders who get stuck. The practice itself becomes a diagnostic tool.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you sit down to write 10 ideas for your go-to-market strategy and you can't get past idea 3, that tells you something. It tells you that you don't understand the problem well enough yet. You haven't done enough customer research. You haven't talked to enough people.
So the struggle itself is actually useful information.
Super useful, because now you know where to focus your energy. Instead of spinning your wheels on strategy, maybe you need to go have 5 more customer conversations first. The idea practice surfaces those gaps in a way that sitting in meetings never will.
Love that reframe. So it's not just about generating ideas, it's about understanding where your blind spots are.
Right. And there's another piece here that I think is really important. When you do this practice consistently, you start to notice patterns in your own thinking. Like maybe you realize that all your marketing ideas are very feature-focused. Or maybe you notice that you keep avoiding ideas that require you to put yourself out there personally. That discomfort is where growth happens. A founder I worked with noticed that every time she tried to generate ideas about pricing, she'd hit a wall at idea 4 or 5. Turns out she had all this baggage around charging what she was worth. The idea practice surfaced that in a way that no amount of strategy sessions ever had.
So it becomes almost like a therapist for your own mental block.
That's a perfect way to put it. And here's the thing about mental blocks. You can't fix what you can't see. Most founders are walking around with these invisible constraints on their thinking and they don't even know it. This practice makes those constraints visible.
Okay, so we've talked about why this matters for generating options, for surfacing blind spots, for identifying mental blocks, but I want to push on something. What about the quality issue? Like, aren't most of these ideas going to be bad?
Oh, most of them will be terrible, and that's completely fine. Actually, that's the point. Because here's what happens when you give yourself permission to have bad ideas. You stop censoring yourself before you even start. And when you stop censoring, occasionally something brilliant slips through that never would have made it past your internal filter.
The bad ideas create space for the good ones. Interesting.
It's like you have to clear out the obvious stuff to get to the interesting stuff. And over time, your ratio improves. Not because you're trying harder, but because you've trained your brain to think differently.
This is really clicking for me now. So we've covered the why behind this practice, but I'm curious, Mark, for our listeners who are thinking, okay, I'm sold, what does this actually look like when you sit down to do it? Like, what's the tactical playbook here?
Tim, I love that you asked that because execution is where people usually fall off the wagon. They buy the notebook, they buy the nice pen, and then they stare at a blank page. So let's get granular. The tactical playbook starts with a very specific constraint. You need one topic and exactly 10 blank lines.
That sounds almost too simple.
It is simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. You need to write down 10 ideas every single day. And the topic can't be broad. If you write, how to grow my business at the top of the page, you are going to fail. That is too big. Your brain will shut down.
Okay, so give me an example of a topic that actually works.
Let's look at a B2B SaaS company. Instead of growth, you write 10 ways to get our first 5 customers using only LinkedIn. Or maybe 10 ways to reduce our churn rate by 1% this month. Do you see the difference there?
Yeah, that is way more tied to immediate action. It forces you to look at the details.
Exactly. And here is where the magic happens. Ideas 1 through 4 are going to be easy. They're the obvious ones. Send a cold message, post a case study. Those are the ideas everyone has. But then you hit idea number 5, and suddenly your brain goes empty.
That's usually where I would stop and go get a coffee.
Right, and that's the mistake. You have to stay in the chair. You have to sweat a little bit, because ideas 6 through 10 are where the innovation lives. Your brain has to bypass the logical, safe answers and start getting creative just to fill the quota. You might write down something crazy like send a physical pigeon with a note to the CEO.
Okay, but I'm probably not going to send a pigeon.
You probably won't. But idea number 8 might be send a handwritten FedEx package to their office, which is actually a very viable strategy that works for high-ticket sales. The pigeon idea was the bridge that got you to the FedEx idea. You see how that works?
That makes total sense. You have to clear the clog to get the water flowing. So I get the manual part, but we talked earlier about technology. Is there a way to use AI here without it doing the thinking for you?
Oh, absolutely. This is my favorite modern twist on the method. I use ChatGPT, but not to write the ideas. I use it to generate the questions.
Walk me through that workflow.
Okay, so I'll go to ChatGPT and paste in a prompt. I tell it, I want to improve my sales process. Act as an insightful interrogator. Ask me one incredibly difficult specific question that will force me to think outside the box.
So you're flipping the script. Usually we ask AI for answers, but you're asking it to give you a problem.
I'm asking it for a harder problem, one that's going to give my brain a workout. It might come back and ask, what are 10 ways you could close a deal if your website completely crashed for a week?
Okay, that is a scary question.
It is terrifying, but it forces you to think about relying on phone calls or physical networking or leveraging partners. It strips away your crutches. And when you force yourself to write 10 answers to that specific prompt, you invariably find 2 or 3 nuggets that you can actually use right now, even when your website is working fine.
That is really powerful. Just like building a muscle for your brain.
Yes, like going to the gym for your brain. You don't just move the weights from point A to point B, you move the weights to change your body. The value of this practice isn't always the ideas themselves. The value is that you become the type of founder who can generate options on demand. When a crisis hits, you don't freeze. Your brain automatically starts listing solutions because that is what you have trained it to do every morning.
So let's say I do this. I have my notebook, I have my list of 10 crazy ideas. What do I actually do with them? Do I try to execute all of them?
No, please don't do that. You will burn out in a week. Most of the time, you just close the notebook and get to work. But maybe once a week, you look back at your lists. You circle the one idea that scares you a little bit, but also makes you excited. And you take one small step toward it. Just one.
Give us a real-world example. Who has done this and actually won?
I remember a founder of a project management tool. He was stuck on marketing. He did this exercise and forced himself to come up with 10 partnerships. Idea number 9 was integrate with our biggest competitor. It sounded nuts, but he reached out to a competitor who served a slightly different market segment. They ended up doing a co-marketing webinar that brought in his biggest month of leads ever. He never would have considered that if he hadn't forced himself past the obvious answers.
That is solid proof. Okay, Mark, we have covered the mental blocks, the technique, and the execution. I want to make sure everyone listening catches the main points here. Can you summarize the entire framework for us in just a few sentences?
All right, let me bring this all together. We started by talking about the idea machine concept from James Altucher. The core insight is that your brain is a muscle that needs daily training. When you write 10 ideas every single day, you build creative capacity that compounds over time. We talked about how the goal is volume, not quality. You have to push past the obvious stuff to get to the interesting stuff. Ideas 8, 9, and 10 are where the magic happens because your brain has to stretch into unfamiliar territory. Then we covered how to actually make this a habit. 15 minutes a day is all it takes. The practice also works as a diagnostic tool because when you get stuck, that tells you where your blind spots are. And finally, we got tactical. Pick one specific question. Set a timer and push to 10 no matter what. Review your list the next day after your brain has processed it overnight. Build an idea bank that you can pull from whenever you need it.
Mark, after everything we've talked about today, what's the one thing you really hope people remember when they turn this episode off?
Here's what I want people to understand. You are not stuck because you lack good ideas. You are stuck because you stopped exercising your brain to come up with ideas. The founders who win are not smarter than you. They just never let their idea muscle atrophy. Start tomorrow morning with one question and 10 answers. That is the whole game. The Marketing Execution Podcast is produced by Growth Stage Marketing. We are on a mission to see your company reach wild success using marketing pods.
Too big, accept dreams. Catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Thank you for listening and being a part of the marketing execution movement and community. To learn how growth stage marketing clients reach more buyers and drive business impact, go to growthstage.marketing. That's growthstage.marketing.